in some of the comments on these threads. What do you think's going on here, Dr. Chafee? What's up with this? Is this just people who are click hungry and view hungry, or do you think they've discovered a new thing? What's going on?
Well, I don't know if I couldn't say that they've discovered a new thing, because basically the advice they're giving is the exact same dietary advice that we've been giving for the last 50 years, which is get about 65% calories from carbs and have a bit of lean meat and some veggies and things like that. Keep your fat under 15, 20%. I mean, I took a nutrition class in 1998, and that was exactly what I was told. So this is the same advice that we've been giving for a long time, and that's exactly what has failed so many hundreds of millions of people up to now. That is the diet that I was raised on. That is the diet that gave my mom diabetes after 45 years. So I don't see that as a new concept. I don't think they've reinvented the wheel somehow. So it's going to be multifactorial. There's going to be a lot of different people that have different motivations. Some of them, I think this is directly related to their own bottom line and profiting from that. I think some people are genuinely concerned when they see these sorts of allegations that a ketogenic diet will elevate your cortisol, give you hypercortisolemia, can give you a sort of Cushingoid reaction, or that it will drop your thyroid. Some people, in fact, who have been carnivore for over a decade have had some issues, but said specifically, my cortisol is fine, my thyroid is fine, I don't know what's going on, but something's happening. And others using their story by saying, see, this is proof that long-term carnivore causes thyroid and cortisol issues, even though they've said explicitly it has not. That's what the long-term data shows. That's what the randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses of the long-term randomized controlled trials on ketogenic diets shows that you don't get hypercortisolemia. You get a transient bump, still within normal range. It's not hypercortisolism in the first few weeks, and then this normalizes and rationalizes. In fact, in medicine, in standard Western medicine, ketogenic diets are used to ameliorate the negative effects of Cushing's and hypercortisolism. So that when someone has a tumor and they're excreting too much cortisol, people are put on ketogenic diets in order to prevent the serious ramifications of that high cortisol before they're able to get surgery, or even continued after they get surgery as a definitive measure. So it's hard to say what the motivations are. I certainly know that in my patient population, I've worked with hundreds of people over the years, looked at their direct blood results and tracked them for 6-7 years now. I've never seen a single one do this. I'm very hands-on with my patients. So if there's an issue, we address it. And there are often ways to, there's often reasons why someone may be gaining weight or may have something. I've never seen it down to the thyroid or the cortisol. It's often because of food creep. People are adding in dairy, especially. That's a new trend that's going on. A lot of these carnivore recipes use a lot of dairy. Dairy will make you gain weight. And even if someone has been using dairy for a long term, they say, well, I've been using dairy for a long time and I haven't had a problem yet. Well, these things creep up. Like I said, the diet that they've gone to caused my mom to have diabetes in 45 years, not 4 weeks, right? So these things take a long time and they can build up. So there are a lot of different reasons, but when I work with people one-on-one, I've worked with thousands of people over the years now, there is always a reason. I mean, this is like you say, this is the proper human diet. This is what we're biologically designed to eat. And so I work on that idea that this should work. I mean, you're not going to find a line, well, everyone's individual snowflakes and everything like that. Like, well, okay, so are lions, but every single lion still needs meat and they still do best on meat. And so if a lion is having a problem, I'm going to see, okay, well, meat shouldn't be the problem. So let's figure out what else is going on. And when I approach it the same way with people, we always find what's going on.
I think that's a great paradigm to operate under. I'll say this about the cortisol thing. I think a big part of what's going on is I think that it is very commonly undiagnosed for people to have hypercortisol syndromes. And as you know, there's several of those. And the average primary care doctor is terrible at diagnosing any adrenal condition whatsoever. And I think there's an underlying 1 to 3% of people who just have hypercortisolism either from a tumor or from some adrenal dysfunction, that they don't know it. And even when that person starts carnivore, they're going to have great results. And you know as well as I do that doctors and patients in the carnivore keto sphere, we tend to be much more lab forward. We're going to check labs very often, and we're going to check a lot more labs. So I think what we're doing is we're uncovering this hidden hypercortisolism that probably 1 million people in America have, that their doctor just hasn't caught because they don't know what labs to check. And I don't think that these people who have added back carbs have discovered a new diet. I think basically they're saying, hey, you should follow the food pyramid.
Yeah.
But wait a minute. That's what got us here. And I think your story about your mom's exactly right. Yeah, you might feel better, but that doesn't mean that this is a healthy long-term option for you. And you know, I'm not 100% carnivore. Everybody needs to be carnivore for life. But I don't think adding back in rice, I don't think that's a magical ingredient that's going to fix a lot of underlying metabolic conditions. I think that's silly. Now, you brought up dairy, and I definitely want to jump into dairy because I have, through my years of studying nutrition, anthropology, archaeology, I have some very specific thoughts and beliefs on dairy. And I want to hear, what is your take on dairy? Let's just say for adults to start with. If somebody's 18 years of age or older, what part, if any, should dairy play in their diets?
Well, I mean, in a strict sense, but probably none from an optimal nutrition point of view. All mammals drink their mother's milk until they're sort of adolescents and then or toddlers, and they get weaned onto their mother's diet and they eat that for the rest of their life. So if we're saying sort of strict according to nature, that's what we would do. Now, dairy and milk have amazing nutrients that are extremely beneficial. They have a lot of very good things in there, great fats. The odd chain fatty acids seem to be cardioprotective. There's so many benefits, and vitamins, minerals, fat soluble vitamins and things like that. These are really beneficial. The problem is it comes with other factors. It has a lot of carbs. It's going to spike insulin. It has casomorphins that are going to tell your body to store energy, because that's the whole point, is you need to give these signals to babies so that they grow quickly, because babies are vulnerable. They get eaten. And so that have a very high infant mortality rate in the wild. And so you need to get these little babies bigger and into adulthood so they have a chance at survival. Now, if you are in a deficient state and like you're in India and you're having a largely vegetarian diet, but you include cheese and ghee, like, please God, yes, keep that in your diet, because that's probably the only thing that's giving you some of these nutrients that you have to have. Weston A. Price found that he could reverse many developmental issues from lack of nutrients by giving people some raw dairy and things like that for those fat soluble vitamins that they weren't getting from other sources. So in that context, I think it can be very beneficial. It does have really good nutrients, but if you're already eating a lot of meat and with animal fat, you're already going to get all those nutrients. So there's nothing that you're missing by cutting out dairy. And I do see a downside to dairy as well from optimal health, and certainly from a perspective of trying to lose weight or even not wanting to gain weight.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think diet, as you know, can take on almost religious overtones.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom fed you a certain thing. It's part of your religion. It's part of your heritage, your culture. But I think that when you try to think about the human diet logically, there are two things, two different goals. One is not starving to death. And so I totally agree with you in certain countries in Asia and Africa. And, if you got access to dairy, eat the dairy, eat all the dairy, because it's much preferable to starving. And you will develop vitamin and mineral deficiencies that can cripple you or kill you, and you can get those from dairy. Now, and so if you're a starving child, a starving 18-year-old in India, and you start eating cheese and you gain weight and you gain muscle and you feel better, do you care if you have minimal chronic inflammation? No, you don't care at all about that, because you're not dead. You didn't starve to death. And so I think then there's not starving. That's one goal of diet. But I think most of us in modern society, we're not in danger of that. What we're trying to do is optimize our health through diet and lifestyle. And I think I agree with you in that context. I don't think there's any I think that it's never a net benefit to add dairy to your diets in any form, really. Now, do you agree with me that say whole milk, liquid milk versus fully fermented yogurt or kefir, do you think they are less inflammatory, less of a problem because of the bending of the protein?
Well, I haven't looked into it specifically from that context, but I mean, I suppose you could say that the fermentation process would sort of improve things slightly, would reduce some of the carbohydrates and bring out some more nutrients. I haven't looked at it from an inflammatory point of view. I mean, it's going to still have a similar amount of casein, which can be inflammatory. And there's, of course, type 1 or type A1 and A2 casein. A2 being less inflammatory than A1, but still showing some inflammatory properties. So I don't know, but from an inflammation point of view, I would imagine it might be similar, except maybe a little bit reduced in the carbs. That might actually reduce some of the inflammation as well. But I haven't looked into it specifically, but from that perspective.
Yeah, I've been reading on that for a while, and it seems that when the microbes act, they eat up the lactose and they bend the protein molecules, the caseins and the whey, and it seems like that makes it less inflammatory. But I'm not saying it makes it uninflammatory. I think it makes it less inflammatory so that more people can enjoy some occasional dairy as a treat. But I really don't think dairy should serve a daily dietary need for adult humans. Now, you're famous, Dr. Chafee, for saying that plants are trying to kill you. Right? That's kind of your tagline, and I know exactly what you mean by that. Tell people who are kind of new to this, because if you say broccoli's trying to kill you or cashews are trying to kill you, for somebody who hasn't been studying nutrition and food and the history of food, they're like, what the hell? What? That guy's nuts. Go into that a little bit. What you mean by that? And maybe give us a few examples of things that we're taught that are kind of non-toxic and not a problem. They can actually be quite a problem.
Yeah, well, that statement came from my professor of cancer biology when I was in my undergrad at University of Washington. He was trying to impress upon us that these natural toxins occurring in plants that they use as defensive mechanisms, that these are not benign. We know about edible and inedible plants. If we get lost in the woods, you can't just eat any random plant because many of them will make you very sick or even kill you. Okay, so we know that these can be toxic or deadly. Out of the 400,000 plants in the world, the vast majority of them will kill you if you eat them because they're so toxic. But he was stressing the fact that the so-called edible plants actually had serious defense chemicals that we needed to consider, and that they could actually cause cancer. So they had carcinogens, and so he pointed this out. And when he was going through all the data, and we were just getting our minds blown, he looked at us and he just said that he didn't eat salads or vegetables. He wouldn't let his kids eat salads or vegetables. And he just said, plants are trying to kill you. Like, why would you eat them? And so it was like, right. And that was that sort of stamp in my life that just said, okay, not eating plants anymore. And, it's not like they have a vendetta against us necessarily. I don't know. I haven't asked a plant, but they absolutely don't want to die. And so they have defenses, and every living thing has a defense. And every living thing in nature is more than happy for you to die if they don't have to. And so while animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. And so they've developed other defenses. And we have categorized, classified, and named nearly 1 million defense chemicals that plants use as a mainstay to defend themselves against predation. And we need to take that seriously. I mean, a good example of this is latex. We wouldn't really think about this. We use latex gloves and things like that. That's actually a sap that's secreted from certain plants that when an animal starts chewing it, it releases this latex. It's very sticky, very tacky, and actually glues their teeth shut, which is a very elegant way to get something to stop eating you, glue their mouth shut. The problem for the animal is that they can't really get their mouth unstuck, and so they die of starvation. So the plant has no problem with you dying if it gets to live, or its babies get to live. This is why you generally see beans, legumes, seeds, nuts, things like that have a higher concentration of these defense chemicals. We even know this in our basic culinary experience. We have beans and legumes that we have to soak sometimes overnight, and we have to boil the living hell out of them. And that's to lower some of the toxic load. We ferment things, we soak them in lye or other chemicals, and this is to denature some of these toxins. The beans, for example, many beans are actually in that inedible class. That if you ate them in their raw form, they could make you very sick or even kill you. The WHO on their website even says that as little as 5 red kidney beans incorrectly processed have actually put people in the hospital.
Absolutely.
So these things can be quite toxic. Now, what about when we do ferment them? What about when we do cook them or boil them? Does that get rid of all toxins? Unfortunately, no, it doesn't. And so you have a small amount of these lectins or oxalates or tannins or phytates or saponins, etc., that are cyanogenic glycosides, and that will remain in the plant and can actually cause harm. This can take a long time. This can take a long time to build up. But again, according to the WHO, as little as 35 to 40 almonds a day on for years, that can build up cyanide to the extent that you can start getting thyroid dysfunction and neurological dysfunction, because cyanide blocks the electron transport chain, your mitochondria, disrupts your energy cycles, and also blocks iodine from getting into your cells, including your thyroid. So it's called a goitrogen. Yep. Kale. We think kale is the most wonderful, magical crop out there, and that's because there was a marketing firm in the 2010s that went like, we're going to make kale a thing. Yep. And they paid Beyonce to wear a sweatshirt that said kale on it and things like that, got it into Manhattan restaurants and got it on the news. So that's where kale came from. But they had to stop giving kale to livestock because it had such strong goitrogens that it was causing stillbirths in baby lambs. It was causing big goiters. I've seen pictures of thyroid bulging out the size of their heads. And it was problematic for cows as well. So they said, okay, well, that's messing with our money. We can't give it to them. Just give it to people. It's fine. I mean,
exactly. And I think it's important to say this for people who don't study this stuff and don't realize this. The domesticated vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds that are available in your supermarket, it's important to know that we humans have crossbred those for hundreds, in some cases thousands of years, to take them from their wild state where they were like immediately lethal to where now you can eat them. And then, so that's the first step is generations of crossbreeding to make the apples big and fat and have lower levels of the anti-nutrients and the phytotoxins that can cause inflammation. But then also, anytime you cook the vegetables, you're going to lower whatever the remaining phytotoxins are by about another 80%, depending. Same goes for nuts and seeds. If you soak them, if you sprout them, and you roast them, you're going to knock down these phytochemicals by about 80%. So you're not going to remove them all. Dr. Chafe is exactly right about that. But you are going to decrease them to the degree that many people can eat them and seemingly have no bad reaction. But if you're eating them daily and you're eating them for months and months and months and eating lots of them, this can build up and it can become a problem. That's absolutely true. Now, I've seen we have a couple of friends in the carnivore community who are very meat heavy diet, but they believe the magic of fermented vegetables. And they every meal they'll have some kimchi or some real sauerkraut. Do you believe there's any magic in fermented vegetables or fermented dairy, or do you think, as I think, that just makes them less inflammatory, just like cooking and crossbreeding?
Yeah, I would be in your camp. I think that if you're going to have these things, I think that's the exactly way to do it. And fine, if people want to do that, that's fine. People think I'm very dogmatic just because I make my personal choices to be very strict, but that's just how my body feels better. I'm happy for anybody to do what they want with their lives, and I encourage them to. And I just don't like people vilifying meat and animal fat and pretending that vegetables are just God's gift, because it's just that's not the whole truth. And so that's what I try to talk about and teach and let people make their own decision. As far as fermented foods, I mean, if you're going to eat plants, I mean, that is the way you do it. And that's going to significantly reduce, the toxic load. Now, there's an argument being made for the microbacteria or for your microbiome and so the bacteria in there. I sort of have a different opinion on that. I mean, I've seen people just anecdotally not include those things and go on a carnivore diet, and their microbiome improves dramatically. And so, I wonder, is that absolutely necessary? Now, well, maybe if you've had antibiotics or you have extreme dysbiosis and this is not quite enough and you're having symptoms, okay, well, maybe that's something to consider. I have had another thought as well, which is just the fact that our oral biome changes dramatically when we go on a carnivore diet. We change, we change our diet. We change what the bacteria can eat. All of a sudden, we don't have the bacteria that rot our teeth and show up in plaques and GBMs. So there's a study that looked at GBMs, and 89% of them had some of these oral bacteria, that these dysbiotic sort of bacteria that we get in the mouth when we eat carbohydrates and sugar. And so, same bacteria that would cause gingivitis. So when you change your diet, you get a very different oral biome. And so the same thing's going to happen if you're putting some kimchi or something like that on your meat and you're chewing it up together to sort of stuff those bacteria inside the bolus of meat to try to get it past your stomach acid, because generally just taking a probiotic, it just dies in your stomach acid. So you have to eat it with food. But that's what's happening in your mouth at the same time. You're getting bacteria in your mouth, and that's getting in your food. So I think that's going to be seeding your microbiome as well. And I think that's probably why people that go onto a carnivore diet actually see their microbiome change pretty dramatically, and all of a sudden get new species of bacteria that are very beneficial. I would imagine that that's the case. And so I think that you have a mouthful of probiotics all the time that carry that burden.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the probiotic, the microbacterium thing, I think the microbiome is very important, but I think currently we understand about 1% of everything we need to know about it. I don't think we know enough about it to really have an opinion at all. It might be that fermented vegetables give you some benefit of some bacteria, but I think the vast majority of the benefit from kimchi and other fermented vegetables is just that you fermented them and thus lowered the phytochemical content significantly. All right. What about this? Now let's talk. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Doctor.
If real quick, just on your point about how we basically know about 1% of the microbiome, I totally agree with you, and I have some personal insight on that too, because I work with an intensivist here in Australia, who actually his main sort of career focus is he studies the microbiome. And so he has well over 200 peer-reviewed studies and papers in the literature on the microbiome specifically. And I was picking his brain a few years ago about the microbiome, and he basically said, once we figure out exactly how these things work and how they influence the body, and which ones do what, and how we can manipulate different species to get what we want, I think that's going to be a huge step forward in advancement in human medicine and our concept of disease. Translating that. We have no idea.
Uh-oh.
That's going to be.
There you are. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think I cut off. Oh,
you're back now.
Oh, okay. So what he said, I was picking his brain about the microbiome, and he basically said, once we figure out, what these bacteria do and how they influence the body and what sort of balance does what, and how we can manipulate that microbiome to get the bacteria that we want, that's going to be a huge step forward for the advancement of medicine and disease. And so translating that basically means we have no idea what's going on with the microbiome. We have no idea how this affects our body, and we have no idea how to manipulate those bacteria. But once we do, that's going to be a big day. And so
I think I totally agree. And I think you would probably agree that people spend thousands of dollars on probiotics and on microbiome testing and on supplements that are supposed to tweak your microbiome, encourage this bacteria, discourage that bacteria. I think that that's a complete and utter waste of money currently, because we don't know enough to even know which bacteria to encourage or discourage. But I love your concept. We know that the appendix is a kind of a library of bacteria, but I love your thought that your oral microbiome is probably also another repository for bacteria. And we know that there are billions of bacteria in the human mouth, and you want the right ones, not the wrong ones. And if anybody watching this, if you're not eating a meat heavy diet and you currently have bad gingivitis or periodontitis, you need 90 days of carnivore. I promise you that'll go completely away. It'll completely senesce. It'll just go into remission. I've seen that so many thousands of times, it doesn't even surprise me anymore with the carnivore diet. What about pork and chicken, Dr. Chafee? We need to talk about this. This is very controversial. There are carnivore purists out there that say if you don't eat ruminant meat only, that you will die and you will not go to heaven. You'll go to the other place. What are your thoughts on pork, on chicken, on fish, and other meats besides ruminant meat, which would be beef, sheep, goat, and reindeer, depending on where you live in the world?
Look, I think all meat is great. I think it's all going to provide extremely healthy and essential nutrients. I mean, we can talk about, how that stacks out on which one's better and gives a better, nutrient profile. But I think people should just eat the meat that they enjoy, that makes them feel the best, and that they can afford, and especially get enough fat. I mean, if you're focusing on skinless chicken breast, you're probably not going to be getting the nutrients that you need from fat and things like that. But as long as you're getting enough fat and you're getting those basic nutrients, eat whatever meat that you enjoy. Any meat is better than all plants because every piece of meat is beneficial, net positive, and every plant has some of these toxins that can sort of hold you back, or they have anti-nutrients that are going to block out the vitamins and minerals or bind up their nutrients in ways that we can't access. So eat whatever meat that you want. Now, if someone has a particular issue like autoimmunity, I do find that in those instances, they can do better with ruminant meat. I feel better with ruminant meat. That's just what I like to do. So that's what I get. But if someone likes chicken or pork, go for it. I mean, I guess you could sort of get into the nitty gritty and think about soy and corn-fed, feedlot intensive sort of pork and things like that have a higher level of linoleic acid in the fat and so forth. But at the same time, if that's what you have access to and that's what you can afford, that's what you should get.
No, I totally agree. Now tell us, what is a typical day of eating for you, Dr. Chafee? What's that look like? What have you eaten? What are you going to eat today? What did you eat yesterday? Just to give people kind of a baseline of what we do.
Yesterday I just had a tomahawk. I typically do things like that. I typically stick with beef, so I'll have like New Yorks or tomahawks or ribeyes, whatever. I've been starting to have some eggs. I do fine with eggs, and there's the old school like golden era bodybuilder sort of shake where you drink like 30 raw eggs a day. And I haven't gotten to 30 yet. I've gotten up as high as 20, but like my body's just like, you don't need all these. So I still listen to my body. I still eat intuitively. I typically will eat once a day, and I just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. And I trust my body knows what it's doing. And then if I'm working out, I've started going back in the gym the last few weeks more consistently. And so I just sort of increased my appetite. So now I'm sort of eating twice a day, and that's because my body wants to put on some muscle. But anytime I eat basically beef and eggs. That's what I eat. And I'm seeing how it goes with the egg shakes and if that does anything.
Yeah. And for those who are concerned, that's my typical diet too, is probably 2 pounds of beef and from 6 to 10 eggs a day. And sometimes I'll have a pork chop. Sometimes I'll have a chicken thigh. Sometimes I'll have some fish, some cod liver, some sardines. But on the daily, it's beef and eggs every single day for me. What about, okay, so I think you're friends with Dr. Robert Cybus, just as I am. I respect him. He's an MD, PhD, very intelligent guy. He thinks he's seeing a subset of patients who are on carnivore, who are developing high triglycerides, high blood sugar, low HDL, chronic inflammation, and that their A1C is creeping up. He thinks and I interviewed him about this, and I couldn't really get him to nail down what percentage of patients this is happening to. But it sounded like he thought maybe 10 to 20% that this was happening in carnivores. Okay. Have you seen a pattern like that? Also, elevated cortisol as well as part of that kind of palindrome. I have not seen that at all. I have seen what I consider to be a slight false elevation in A1C. And I've talked with Professor Bickman and Sean Baker about this, that we think it's because the red blood cells are living longer. because of the nutrient density and the uninflammatory nature of the diet. Because when you check a fructosamine, it's uniformly normal, even though their A1C might be 5.7, 5.8, their fructosamine's normal. And then those people whose A1C has crept up on a carnivore diet to 6.1, 6.2, if you have those people start sending you pictures of their meals and really being honest and tracking, carb creep is what's going on with their A1C. They back in too much of a sauce or a rub or a condiment or something. Have you seen that kind of syndrome that Dr. Sivas has been talking about?
No, I certainly haven't. And I haven't seen that to that degree by any stretch of the imagination, certainly not 10%. I have seen some people have, even, taking their word for it, that they're very, very strict, just meat and water, that their triglycerides can be high and their HDL stays low, and actually take their particulate, their subfraction studies of their LDL and actually have pattern B LDL. And it's like, okay, well, what's going on? The common denominator for those, and that was 3 patients of mine over the course of years, so not common. High stress, very poor sleep. That was the common denominator for them. Some personal issues, some work issues. They were just very, very under the gun. And then when that resolved, it is just normalized. So high stress situations can raise cortisol, and that can derange your triglycerides and HDL. So cortisol is a thing, and a lot of things affect cortisol. It doesn't have to be your diet. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And again, looking at this from like, well, this diet should be good for you because you're relying. What else is going on? That I typically find something else going on. So in those 3 instances, that was stress and poor sleep. As far as the HbA1c, I've sort of seen bits of fluctuation. I've even seen bits of fluctuation in my A1C. I've seen it down at 5, and then it sort of popped up to 5.4, 5.5, and then it went down to 4.9. It was like, oh, okay, what was that? I don't know. It was just, at the time, I was just like, oh, okay, great. The fact of the matter is, I don't much care about that, because I know I'm eating what I'm supposed to be eating. My body's doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so I'm not going to get hung up on a single number, as I'm sure you do as well. We don't treat lab numbers, we treat patients. And so me as the patient, I was very healthy. But the other thing too is that, yes, the red blood cells can live longer. You take seed oils out of your diet. Those seed oils have cholesterol, the plant sterols, that get stuck in the membrane of the red blood cells. That makes them a bit more stiff and rigid, and they die quicker. They get taken out by your spleen quicker. The other thing I noticed was Dr. Baker, when he's an advocate, he's a highly avid athlete. He just works out all the time, and he was wearing a CGM for a while, and he noticed that when he was working out, his blood sugar could go up to 180, 200. And that's just physiological. He's expending a lot more energy. His body, it requires more. It's increasing that energy demand. Okay, so what is that going to do to your HbA1c? Well, it's going to sort of have a bit of a glycative effect. Okay, but that's physiological. We're not saying that's pathological. And he works out every single day, so he's having these bumps in blood sugar every single day. That's going to affect your HbA1c. And then when I thought back to those times when my A1C went up to 5.5, 5.6. That was when I was in the gym 4 or 5 days a week playing rugby, just nonstop. And then those other times that I was a bit more sedentary, just hammered down with work and just couldn't get to the gym regularly. That's when my A1C went down a bit as well. So that's sort of what I've noticed. Dr. Saibi's like, I love the guy. He's a very smart guy. I've met him in person. He's really nice. When he's presented on that issue at conference in San Diego a couple of years ago, he was talking about a few of his patients. I mean, and it sounded like this was sort of anecdotal, sort of one-offs from what he was saying. So I don't know if that's changed since then. It seemed like this was like, hey, look, I've seen this weird thing happen, and this is what I think's going on. But I haven't seen that in my patient population. I do stay on my patients and try to recommend them to stay strict. And they're very honest with me, because I don't badger them and things like that. We talk about it. They come in and it's like, how's it going? It's like, hasn't been good, doc. Hasn't been good. Okay, fair enough. And so we know what we're working with. But my patients that stay strict, they come in, once a year, once every couple of years, just for a checkup, and everything's perfect. And so I haven't seen that.
Something that worries me about our mutual friend, Dr. Paul Saladino, You know, he's still very animal-based, meat-based, but he eats lots of fruit and quite a bit of honey. And some days he eats 300-400 grams of carbohydrates from fruit and honey. And one of the things that worries me about that is the degree of fructation or fructose, because what I can't get him to admit, even though I've showed him the studies, is that the hemoglobin A1C test only checks for glucose glycation. That's all it checks for. Even the fructosamine that has fruct in the name only checks for glucose glycation. And we know from research that fructose is 7 to 10 times more glycating than glucose. And so I really worry about the long-term effects of this fructose glycation, but he doesn't seem worried at all. Are you comfortable if one of your clients or a family member says, hey, I want to do this, you know, the Paul Saladino version where I'm eating lots of meat, but also drinking lots of fruit juice and eating lots of fruits? What would you say to them to either say, yeah, that's fine, or yeah, I would rather you not, and here's why?
I generally would rather they not. And certainly if people want to experiment in these sorts of things, but you know, that's up to them. It's their life. But I've had a lot of people that have done that, and they've sort of gone down a slippery slope and start adding a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. Then all of a sudden they're adding in more carbs and more things. And then 6 months later, they're on the couch eating, you know, Doritos and pizza, and they've regained all this weight and things like that. And they just go, okay, I got to get back. And I also talk about the glycation effect and the fructation, because whether or not you're developing insulin resistance or diabetes, you're getting these spikes. And even if that comes back down to a normal level, I mean, even just talking about glucose, even if your blood sugar comes back to a normal level, you still have this spike. You still have that area under the curve that you're going to be damaging your body. And that's something that I take seriously, because that glycation is such a major driver of disease. I mean, it just damages the inside of your vessels. It's destroying those small vessels that go to your kidney, that go to your eye, that go to your feet. And number one cause of kidney failure is high blood sugar, diabetes. Number one cause of adult onset blindness is high blood sugar, diabetes. The number one risk of getting your legs amputated is high blood sugar and diabetes. So I worry about that. And, you know, this happens over time. This happens over a long time, but you are going to get this damage, even if you're not seeing it right now. Fructose, like you said, 7-8 times the glycative effect of glucose. So this is going to cause issues. I mean, it's been shown to cause fatty liver disease. I mean, this is Dr. Lustig did a study in children that met the Bradford Hill criteria for causation on fructose causing fatty liver, which shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, I was taught in my first year of medical school, we go through the biochemistry of different things, that fructose, one of the metabolites of fructose in the liver is a fatty droplet that accumulates in the liver, just like alcohol. So we shouldn't be surprised that fructose causes fatty liver disease, just like alcohol causes fatty liver disease. So, you know, we have these problems, these downstream problems, even though people feel good. The other thing too, people say that, oh, carbohydrates can't, fruit's not going to cause, fatty liver disease, or carbs don't do that, blah, blah, blah. How do we make fatty liver disease in ducks, foie gras? We force feed them grains, not even sugar, not alcohol, certainly not fat. We feed them grains for just 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And their livers are completely full of fat. They look like butter. In fact, fat. I don't understand how people can argue that fat is what's causing fatty liver. I think they're just sort of have that juvenile sort of appearance. It's like there's fat in it, that must be from fat, right? Yeah. But fat is the only macronutrient that does not get taken up by the liver. It goes into lymphatics, goes straight into your bloodstream. So it's the only thing that doesn't go into your liver.
Yeah, and let me restate that very clearly. Any of you guys watching this, if your doctor said that eating fat causes fatty liver, or eating fat makes you fat, or your dietitian said, oh, you're eating too much saturated fat that could lead to fatty liver, what that reveals to you is a complete ignorance of hepatic physiology. That's what that reveals. They literally don't understand the pathways. They either learned them and forgot them, or never learned them to start with, because that's physiologically impossible. And speaking of physiologically impossible, there's a large contingency of people out there, Dr. Chafee, who say that if you eat too much protein, which obviously a carnivore diet's going to have lots of healthy protein, you will force your liver to ramp up gluconeogenesis, and that will cause problems in the long run. Before you answer that, I want to ask everybody watching, please click the share button and share this somewhere on social media, in an email, in a WhatsApp. Let's get this up. We got 4,200 people watching. We need that needs to be 42,000, because there are millions of people suffering from metabolic disease. So, Doc, does your tomahawk does that force your liver to kick into high gear gluconeogenesis?
No. I mean, gluconeogenesis is demand driven, not substrate driven. Also, the main pathway for gluconeogenesis is the glycerol pathway. When you're breaking down triglycerides for energy, you have triglycerides. So you have 3 fatty acids with a glycerol backbone. You split those off. The fat becomes ketones, but then there's glycerol, free glycerol, that gets turned into glucose and glycogen, etc. So it's just sort of happens automatically. You don't need the protein. When you look at gluconeogenesis, when you're first fasting or first going on a ketogenic diet, then you might see some protein usage that goes very, very quickly. And then the glycerol pathway is the main driver of gluconeogenesis. In fact, when you're in ketosis and you have enough fat stores available, the last thing you're going to do is catabolize your muscle protein as well. So it's sort of a tangent, but people worry about this. They say if you're in ketosis or you're on carnivore, you're going to lose all this muscle. You're not going to be able to build muscle. Tell that to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Serge Nubret when they would just eat meat exclusively for 3 months before competition prep. They had some of the best physiques in history. And that was their diet. It was just steak and eggs, steak and eggs, steak and eggs, or just Serge Nubret was just 6 pounds of horse meat a day. And they easily put on muscle. And that was sort of in the early days of steroids. Arnold Schwarzenegger certainly used some, but Serge has spoken out against them. Vince Carano spoke out against them. And then sort of in the 80s, it started picking up and things like that. So meat absolutely is good for you. It does not, eating a ketogenic diet, you don't need carbohydrates to keep your muscle. You're not going to just start catabolizing your muscle proteins just to make glucose. It's silly. You automatically do that as part of the glycerol pathway. When you're breaking down fat, you will drive glucose generation as well to demand.
Absolutely. Now, you know what else is popular right now, Dr. Chafee? Very, very popular, and that's creatine. Now, I keep trying to tell people that I get about 6 grams of creatine a day from the meat that I eat, but there are carnivores out there, carnivore influencers, who still pushing a creatine powder. Do you think there's a place for a creatine supplement? Do you think that at a certain level of athletic intensity, the meat is great, but you need a little extra creatinine to help optimize recovery, muscle function, brain function, etc.? Or do you think you get all the creatine you need from meat?
Well, I personally think you get it all from meat. I mean, I think that it's very telling that the exact amounts that people find in studies, well, this is a really good amount of creatine, is basically what you get if you ate 2 pounds of meat a day. And so I think that probably tells you that maybe you should just eat 2 pounds of meat a day.
I thought that was just a coincidence, doctor. I know. I see what you're saying now, though. That may be a pattern.
Yeah, exactly. And I do know from my days when I was a teenager, when creatine first became very, very popular and amongst athletes, and especially college athletes, I remember trying it, and I would always eat a lot of meat. That was always my focus, was meat. If I could get away with just eating meat and get away from the dinner table without eating anything else, I did. But I took creatine. I basically noticed no difference. I ended up stopping taking it after several weeks. I'm like, I don't really see this doing anything for me. I guess the caveat to that would be if you have a brain injury. There are some preliminary studies in concussions and TBIs that show that your brain might have a higher metabolic demand for energy and for creatine. And so there's very preliminary, but there was a small study looking at post-concussive syndromes, people that had these persistent concussion syndromes months and months and months after their injury, and they took high doses of creatine, like 60 grams a day for 5 days, and that actually helped to improve things. So, okay, well, maybe there's room for that. Obviously, that needs more research, but there could be something in that and some sort of an injury or extreme sort of issue. But I think for day-to-day muscle building, growth, and just health, I think you get everything you need from meat as long as you're eating enough meat.
Love it. What about vitamin C, Dr. Chafee? You said you eat a tomahawk or a couple of New York strips a day. There's a little bit of vitamin C in red meat, not much. Do you check your vitamin C levels? Do you take a vitamin C supplement? Do you check vitamin C levels in your patients? If yes, why? If no, why?
No, I don't check it in my patients. Certainly, I don't think that it's necessary. The thing is that vitamin C, we need much more of it if we're eating carbohydrates, because vitamin C gets blocked out from your digestion. They get sucked up by the GLUT4 receptor, as do carbohydrates. And so you're eating hundreds of grams of carbohydrates. That's going to block out the milligrams of vitamin C that you're eating. You're not eating the carbohydrates. You're going to take in more of the vitamin C. Additionally, we have to think about what we need vitamin C for in the first place. As in the context of scurvy, now we see this in some of our immune cells or macrophages, etc. But from the context of scurvy, vitamin C catalyzes a reaction that hydrolyzes proline and lysine so that they can form this alpha helix and stick together very tightly. If they're not hydrolyzed, they sort of repel each other. So you get loose collagen, you get loose connective tissue, and you start having bleeds and breaks. You can get aortic dissections and have fatal internal bleeds. So it's very dangerous. That's scurvy. But when you are eating enough meat already has hydrolyzed proline and lysine. So you're getting that substrate already. So you actually skip a step. You don't actually need the vitamin C at all. So if you're eating enough meat and you're getting enough hydrolyzed proline and lysine from the meat, your demand for vitamin C for scurvy and collagen production is zero. So it's not even that you need less of it, and the carbohydrates being gone is acceptable. Like, you don't actually need any of it. I think of this from the perspective of the Maasai, because the Maasai are carnivores, but they also drink milk, and milk has carbohydrates. And so what little vitamin C they're getting from the meat, they're probably blocking out a lot of that. No scurvy. Right. And so I don't think that caused a problem as well. I actually did a self-test with vitamin C, and I drank like a gallon of raw milk a day for 3 days, and I tested my vitamin C. It didn't even show up. It was like trace. And I'm like, well, that's what that is. So I would imagine that the vitamin C levels of Maasai are actually quite low. So doing this long term, and they don't seem to have any problems.
Exactly. And the last time I don't check it in patients typically, because I agree with you completely. If your diet is low enough in carbohydrates, you're going to get enough vitamin C. It's not an issue. But I checked mine, and it was either 0.2 or 0.3, which was obviously low. But one thing that, Nisha compliments me for lots of stuff, obviously. But one thing that she compliments me on is she's like, you heal like an Avenger, because I'm out in the woods all the time with the chainsaw. There's briars, there's brambles, there's thorns, there's, sticks, and I'll get huge lacerations or abrasions. And I had a big one, a gigantic one on my arm, and like 4 days later, it was virtually healed and gone. And I think it's important for people to understand, if that low vitamin C level, if that was really meaningful, it would have taken a month for that to heal. Does that make sense? Because it just, you can't, your connective tissue is not going to work properly if you are truly deficient in vitamin C. And I think Dr. Chafee is exactly right. If you're eating as close to zero carb as you possibly can, there's really minimal, if any, need for vitamin C at all. I think you're exactly right. And I know that's a bit controversial to say. We'll probably get some kickback on that. The one vitamin deficiency that I've seen, and it's super rare, it's in carnivores, and it's in carnivores who are mainly lion diet. So either by choice they're eating only ruminant meat, or that they just like beef and nothing else. I've seen, I think, 2 people with a low B1 thiamine level. And I was doing some research on this, and pork is 10x, 15x higher in B1 than beef. And both those instances, we added back I said, eat a pork chop twice a week. That's it. And so they kept eating their beef, and they would just add a pork chop once or twice a week, and the B1 level went right back up to normal. In both cases, they were having a mild neuropathy. and that went completely away as well. But that's really the only vitamin defect or deficiency I've seen at all on a carnivore diet, and that's in people who are eating a very focused, narrow carnivore diet. Have you seen any vitamin or mineral deficiencies at all on any of the versions of carnivore?
Well, that's really interesting. It's not to the extent that they're getting neuropathies or any sort of serious like signs or symptoms of a deficiency. I typically see people's vitamins and minerals go up, especially if they're not having other sorts of things. I know you like coffee, and I think coffee is great for a lot of things, but I find it the anti-nutrient effects of the coffee, I think, are should be considered. I have actually several dozen patients that came in that were on thyroid medication, and it showed up that basically they were floridly hypothyroid, both in their numbers and their symptoms. And so we say, okay, what's going on? It basically was back to where before they were taking their thyroid medication, and they were all still taking it, but it all turned out that they were having coffee basically with their medication. And we found out that, it was just blocking it out. And thyroid medication, as you know, is very temperamental anyway. You have to take it on its own. You can't take anything else for at least half an hour besides water. But the coffee seemed to be an issue even after half an hour. And so we found out through trial and error that people had to basically wait about 2 hours before they had coffee, or it would significantly reduce the absorption. And all of a sudden, their numbers were just coming back up. I should probably publish that because there were like dozens of people that did that. But it'd be kind of interesting. But
that'd be a great study.
Yeah. And, but, so I'll see maybe some issues with zinc or magnesium, usually not in a deficient level, but maybe not getting up as high as other people. The one thing I do see sometimes, if someone has MTHFR or something like that, they might be a bit low on folate or B12. And I have actually seen some people, it's no fault of the diet. It's just their own genetics. They might need a little bit of liver or something else, but they're not symptomatic. But that's one marker that I do try to keep track of, is because Oxford University published a paper in 2008 that showed that under 500 picomoles per liter, which is 650 or so picograms per milliliter in the U.S., that people are actually getting demyelination of their white matter. They couldn't keep rebuilding their white matter around their axons, the myelination around their axons, and they actually had shrinkage in their brain volume by 2.5% after 5 years. And that under 307 picomoles per liter, they actually got shrinkage by 5.5% after 5 years. So and then you see kids that are B12 deficient, they don't get that myelination. They look like the MRI of an 80-year-old with significant brain atrophy, and then they replace the B12 and it plumps right up, which is great. But just sort of stave that off, and that's the other thing too. If that looks like an 80-year-old, we know that's known B12 deficiency. Well, maybe this is not normal age-related atrophy over time. Maybe this is malnutrition over time. And that if your B12 is right bang smack in the middle of the reference range, and your doctor says, yeah, your B12 is fine, but it's at 300, and maybe you're losing 1% of your brain volume per year, after 30, 40 years, you're going to look like that 80-year-old atrophied patient. So I do sort of track that one. I'd like to keep on top of that. Also, that can help metabolize homocysteine. And if you get elevated homocysteine, that can be a cardiovascular risk and atherosclerotic risk. And so I saw some people, typically B12 goes up, folate goes up, or all these nutrients go up. And a couple of people that just persistently lower B12, even after I've given them an injection. And so we said, okay, maybe you have MTHFR, why don't you add in some liver? And they add in liver 3 days a week, doesn't budge. I'm like, all right, what else is going on? And so I checked them for pernicious anemia antibodies, and actually they were positive. So I've actually diagnosed 3 or 4 people with pernicious anemia, because if you're just eating red meat and you're eating liver 3 days a week, like, you should not have any problem with your B12. Correct. And so because they're definitely getting enough in their food, but they weren't. And so they actually had pernicious anemia. So they actually were positive for that. And so that's just good to know. And so I think that it's a good idea to just sort of check these things, even if it's hard too, because you feel so much better and you're improving in so many ways that you don't necessarily realize you're being held back by something. But I've had people come in after a year or two on Carnivore and say, look, I feel 90% better than I ever have, but I feel that there's still something missing there. And this lady in particular, she was a professor of nursing and, now retired. And she felt that way. And we found out, sure enough, she actually had some nutritional deficiency. She had malabsorption issues. She just could not get these things in through her gut. And so we had to look at other things too, had pernicious anemia, for example. So I've seen some things like that too.
What about egg allergies? Is the allergy to egg or reaction to eggs, do you see that fairly commonly, or is that rare, or do you ever see that?
I see people reacting negatively to eggs less commonly. Most people seem to do fine with it. Seem to have more issues with egg whites, especially with autoimmunity, I've found. It's pretty anecdotal, but that's just sort of what I'm seeing people saying that, no, this gives me sort of a reaction when I have these sorts of things. But by and large, most people do fine with eggs, and that's a really good part of their diet.
Yeah, and I agree with that. There's a couple of things that, because I see maybe it's not even 1% of the people that I interact with who have a sensitivity, or not a full-blown anaphylactic reaction, but just a sensitivity to eggs. It's almost always the white. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a nerd. And so I'm mm-hmm. out, on the farm working, and I'm trying to think through this egg problem. Like, they're so ancestrally appropriate. Why are these people sensitive to eggs? Maybe it's the factory fed eggs that are not mm-hmm. being fed an improper diet. And then, because I was an animal biologist before I went to medical school, so I'm always thinking about the animal end of this as well. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, and eggs are ancestrally appropriate. And then it dawned on me, Anthony, the eggs in the supermarket are not fertilized ever. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, when we go back in time, when we found a nest of eggs, the eggs wouldn't be in the nest unless they were fertilized. And I'm like, maybe that's what's going on. And so I start looking into this, and it's absolutely factual that the instant that an egg is fertilized, it's almost like an electrical reaction goes through the entire albumin, the white of the egg, and starts to immediately change the protein structure. Immediately, within seconds. And I'm like, I wonder. And so I've been, people that I interact with who have this egg sensitivity, I'm like, find a little old lady who's got chickens in her backyard that has a rooster. And every single time they've done that, they're like, yes, I can eat those eggs. They don't bother me at all. Now, those backyard hens are eating a better chicken diet, almost assuredly. But also, if there's a rooster around, roosters do their homework. Every single one of those eggs is fertilized when you get it out of the nest. And that's the kind of weird things I'm constantly theorizing about. I know you think about this stuff all the time too. Do you have any little theories about things that you're like, I wonder?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, to your point with the fertilized eggs, it's really interesting. I mean, I certainly do think that people eating a different, or the chickens being fed different things, I can definitely cross over into the egg. But I talked about the old bodybuilder egg diet, drinking down 30 eggs a day. That came from a guy named Vince Garanda, who's the iron guru. Yeah, and he specifically said it should be fertilized eggs.
Really?
And
he actually said that.
Yeah, fertilized eggs. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I think that's a thing, but I can't prove it yet. But I think that matters for some people, not everybody.
Yeah, he seemed to think it made a difference, and he thought that that was the one he wanted to do. I don't know if he had too much behind that, apart from that he said that it changed it somehow. I can't remember exactly how his phrasing was, but that he thought that improved things as well. Different theories. Well, I mean, I think that, sort of one of the theories was that the oral biome seeding the microbiome. I think I think that's probably the case. And that once you've seeded the microbiome, it should just perpetuate itself based on the food that you're eating, because every animal that's eating its natural diet is cultivating and supporting its natural microbiome as well, that will help and support them as well. The other thing I was thinking was this whole rash of people saying you have to have carbohydrates, they're essential, which of course we know that they're not. You made a great short that I always reference people to, how many carbs you need to not die. And, saying the National Academies of Science and the Institutes of Medicine say basically 0. You don't have to do any of these things, and they have no deleterious health effects or effects on longevity. And that's true. That's what we see. And of course, why wouldn't it? That's how we evolved. We have people walking from Asia to North America on a mile-high block of ice bridge that span the Bering Strait. So there's no fresh quinoa and sweet potatoes up there, right? And it's like, oh, but people in Papua New Guinea, they eat sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are New World, so they've only been eating those things for 400 years. They haven't been eating those things for 80,000 or 800,000.
Yeah, guys, stop with the sweet potatoes. They actually came from South America, Central America.
Yeah.
They are not indigenous to Asia or Europe or Africa. Nobody was eating sweet potatoes. Literally nobody, until we discovered and colonized the New World. So shut up about the sweet potatoes. That you're ignorant.
Yeah, and I had two thoughts actually about carbohydrates. I was saying, well, these are essential, and I found that there's actually two proofs that I think you could definitively say we are clearly not biologically designed to eat carbohydrates, and that's first being insulin. We actually have the wrong kind of insulin. It doesn't match the spike that we get from glucose. So glucose spikes up, then we have this insulin arc that goes, and then glucose goes too low, and you might actually get hypoglycemia, reactive hypoglycemia. This is a known consequence. And then you feel tired and lethargic, and so you eat more carbs, and so your insulin is going like this, and your blood sugar is going like that, right? So it's not matching that insulin curve. And in fact, in diabetics that require insulin, we've had to reinvent insulin because people were getting so many hypoglycemic episodes. They were dying from this by injecting insulin. We had to reinvent insulin and get Act Rapid, Nova Rapid, that better match that spike, that carbohydrate spike. It went up and it went down and went away, right? So you didn't get that massive hypoglycemia. As long as you matched the right amount of units to the carbohydrates, you just get back to normal blood sugar levels. And type 1 diabetics that are now going ketogenic or even carnivore, they're finding that Act Rapid, Nova Rapid is not working for them because they do still require insulin for the protein, but they don't need that spike, that aggressive spike. So now they're getting too aggressive of a spike of insulin. So they've gone back to the R insulin, the original insulin. And that's the thing. Like if we just needed to replace this insulin, why wouldn't we just use our normal insulin? Why would we have to reinvent it? That doesn't make sense. And they're going back to just using the R insulin, and that perfectly matches that protein arc for that requirement of insulin. So our insulin is designed for protein. It is not designed for carbohydrates. So I think that's proof number one. Proof number two is, again, going back to our oral biome. The bacteria that you cultivate by eating carbohydrates rots your teeth, causes gingivitis, causes heart disease, or it is being implicated in heart disease, is being implicated in brain diseases like GBM. So your oral health is a window to your overall health, and especially your cardiovascular health. And so if you're eating something that's rotting your teeth, that's causing cavities, that's a bad sign, because no animal in nature eats a natural diet that rots their teeth. Now, they might have to go outside of their natural diet for survival purposes, and that might rot their teeth, but that's not the same thing. When they're eating their natural diet, their evolved diet, their most optimal diet, they don't rot their teeth. Because when you lose your teeth, you lose the ability to eat and you die. So that's not a survival advantage. And so anything that rots your teeth, you can just say by definition is not designed for you biologically. And so carbohydrates cultivate the bacteria that rot our teeth, and we would lose our teeth and we would lose the ability to eat. And so obviously that's not our natural diet. And also what's damaging your mouth, again, oral biome mirror into your overall health, or your oral health is a mirror to your overall health. So it's something that's causing damage to your mouth, and your oral health is likely causing damage to your overall health. And that's something that's now being further investigated, again, by seeing these bacteria in arterial plaques and in GBMs and things like that.
Yep. And it's absolutely an anthropological fact that if you go back in the archaeological record, more than 12,000 years before the agricultural de-evolution, every human skull that we find has, unless a tooth was knocked out from trauma, because there was some trauma back then, they had zero cavities, zero evidence of dental abscesses, of gingivitis, of any of that kind of stuff. They just didn't have. And I think back then we were eating more like a bear. We ate lots of meat. If we found a nest of eggs, we ate it. If the berries were ripe, we ate those berries. If we found some little bitter sour fruits that were ripe, we ate those if we were hungry. But that they didn't have tooth decay. It just
Mhm.
was not a thing before we started eating all the wheat, rice, oats, and corn. And then
Mhm.
later, in what, the 1600s, 1500s, when sugar was discovered
Mhm.
and we were able to process it and ship it, then everybody's teeth started falling out. And so
Yeah.
a good friend of mine, Kevin Stocks, a dentist, he said if people would stop eating or drinking any sugar and eating any grains, 99% of dentists would be unemployed. They literally would
Mhm.
have to do outside. Maybe you need braces. Maybe you got a tooth knocked out. But as far as filling teeth and filling cavities and pulling infected teeth, they would never do that because it would not be a
Yeah.
thing. So,
Can I just expound on that just real quickly?
yeah.
The other thing is amylase. We look at amylase, it's the enzyme that breaks down starch and
Yep.
breaks it down into glucose. You do see that in the genome. So the more repeats that we have in the genome, the more ability you have to break down amylase. And so that would denote actually eating more and more starches and things like that. So you see like sort of single, versions of this or a single repeat sort of things back further in our evolutionary past. But at 10,000 years ago or so, with the advent of agriculture, that's when you see this massive multiplication of amylase. And so it just, from a population-wide level, maybe individuals here and there, for survival reasons, maybe the ripe fruit, for the 2 weeks that it was available, fine. But on a mass population scale, we don't see people eating all that much carbs because simply it just wasn't. We didn't even have the genetic capacity to do that. So amylase started massively increasing after 10,000 years ago, and we had people saying that no, it must only be seed oils that's causing these problems. We've always been eating carbohydrates. Like, well, no, the degeneration in human health happened exactly when agriculture kicked in. That's when teeth started rotting. We reduced our height by 6 inches, our brain size reduced by 11% for men, 17% for women within generations.
Yep.
And we started seeing chronic disease, etc. Diabetes was described by that name 2,200 years ago in Egypt. And we were treating that with ketogenic diets since the 1700s, 150 years before seed oils even existed. So you can't say that this is only processed food that causes this. We've had this for thousands and thousands of years. And the treatment was a ketogenic diet, and it worked. And people say you can only reverse type 2 diabetes if you remove seed oils. Like, well, I'm sorry, but seed oils didn't exist. And that's exactly what reversed it for hundreds of years. I have a medical textbook from Sir William Osler, the first, Osler's nose, very famous guy.
Yep.
He was the first professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins. And my great grandfather was a doctor and a surgeon, and he had this textbook, and his textbook was from. Now he qualified as a surgeon in the 1890s, but he had this textbook from 1910, and Osler wrote this book. There's a chapter on diabetes, and it says explicitly the gold standard treatment for the treatment of diabetes type 1 and type 2. They didn't differentiate at the time. Is carbohydrate restriction. You cut down carbs to 0, and you have essentially equal portions of grams of protein and fat. And that was the only thing that could keep people alive. Older people that had diabetes, so more likely the type 2 diabetics, they had a very high survival rate. They did very, very well. The younger presentations, the juvenile diabetes patients, they had a very high mortality rate. But listen to the wording, high mortality rate, not death sentence, 100%. That means some of these people were surviving long term. And he even said that without insulin, this is a decade before insulin was discovered in 1910, that is kept type 1 diabetics alive for 7 to 9 months after their presentation, and and high mortality rate, but obviously not a complete mortality rate. And so people were actually living and surviving on that. I think that's extremely telling.
I totally agree. And Dr. Osler did not mention vegetable seed oils as a cause, and they didn't restrict vegetable seed oils because they hadn't been invented yet. Final question, Dr. Chafee, fasting. How many hours a day on average do you fast? Do you eat 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day? Do you think that there is a therapeutic place for intermittent fasting or longer fasting, 3-day, 5-day, 7-day fast? Do you utilize that in your practice? What are your thoughts on fasting?
Well, I think we're more than capable of doing this because all animals are capable of surviving without food for a while, or else they would all be dead. And certainly predators, you may not get a kill every day. So we're certainly capable of that. It would be more of a feast and fast sort of scenario, though. And one thing, trouble that people can get into is when they fast, they don't eat enough on those other days, and so they tend to eat less and less. And I have seen that reduce their metabolic rate. And when they actually start eating a more normal amount, they actually put weight back on. And so we have to understand how that's going to affect our metabolism. But then we look at the Mongolians, the Genghis Khan, the Mongol horde. They would go 5 days without eating, just ravaging the countryside, and then they'd eat 10 pounds of horse meat and do it again. But they were feasting. They weren't just starving themselves. So they were getting adequate amounts of nutrition. I don't fast myself. I just eat intuitively. I let my body tell me what it needs. I mean, that ends up looking like an OMAD sort of scenario because I tend to not be hungry more than once a day. If I'm working out more, I'll be hungry twice a day. But I don't necessarily consider that fasting. I'm just eating when I'm hungry. And so I sort of think of fasting as it is the deliberate and intentional withholding of food when you're hungry and your body's telling you to eat. So I don't do that. I eat when my body tells me to eat. If I can. Obviously, when I was in neurosurgery, I might be there for 36, 60 hours and just be at the hospital. I am not going anywhere. This is just too busy. Yep. But my body was able to handle that. And then I feasted, when I got out of there. But I find that it works really well for people just to eat intuitively. So that might be a 23-hour fasting window when you look at it, but they're only hungry once a day. Sometimes people, if they maybe fast for like a 48-hour period, that can sort of help reset their hunger signals and go like, well, actually, we don't need as much food as we thought we did. And then they sort of get back to a more intuitive sort of carnivore eating. Maybe if someone has cancer, there could be therapeutic effects for that to really drive up their ketones and drop their blood sugar to get their GKI down low. I think one positive from fasting for a cancer perspective is that you're not only withholding carbohydrates, you're also withholding glutamine, which cancers can also run on. And glutamine comes in anything, the plants and meat and everything like that. We make it as well, just like we do make glucose, but we make a lot less of it than you might eat. And so there might be an added benefit for cancer for actually withholding the glutamine as well as the carbohydrates, but that hasn't been proven. However, people with lower GKIs do seem to have better survival outcomes for cancer. So there might be a benefit there. But I think for just normal day-to-day people, I find that maybe you can involve fasting if you feel better that way, but be careful about eating enough on the off day so you don't suppress your metabolism. And for most people like myself, I don't find that I need to do that. Just eating intuitively works really well.
I think for the vast majority of people, that's true. Dr. Chafee, this has been very helpful, I think, for a lot of people. I appreciate you doing this. Tell us where people can find you, and if it's possible for people to work with you one-on-one remotely, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's good to see you too. And well, I have a website. It's just dranthonychafee.com, dranthonychafee.com. People can find a lot of things there. I'm very active on social media, although I don't like to be because it's just a time suck. But I also have a YouTube channel, just my name, Anthony Chafee MD, Instagram, Anthony Chafee MD. If people did want to see me as a patient and they were in Australia, I have a private practice here in Perth called Elevate Medical Center that people can find. And then for people outside of Australia or in Australia just want to talk about diet and don't actually want to be a patient, I can do limited amounts of consultations once a week that I set aside for that as well. And that can be found through my website. There's a Calendly link there.
Perfect. I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. Thank you, doctor. I'm ending my day. You're starting yours. Thanks for doing this. And everybody watching, don't forget to share this video because we covered a lot of stuff that's going to help a lot of people. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
All right. See you later.
Take care.